Before starting 5.
Namaste and greetings. I, Ritika Pandey, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्था, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on employment, livelihoods, and Union Budget 2024-25. This deliberation is a part of IMPRI fifth annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget 2024-25, which is a series of panel discussion on crucial key policy issues and Union Budget 2024-25 involving more than 100 thematic distinguished experts and research team members. This discussion is organized by the Center for Work and Welfare, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, as a part of IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, The State of Employment and Livelihood Employment Debate. Now let me introduce the esteemed gathering. Our chair for the session is Professor Suchita Krishnaprasad ji, visiting professor, IMPRI, former associate professor and head of the Department of Economics, Elphinstone College, Mumbai. We welcome you, ma'am. Today's deliberation comprises of an excellent distinguished panel of experts who will be sharing their expertise, which includes Mr. Sandeep Chachra ji, Executive Director, Action 8 Associate, India, and ex-co-chair, World Urban Campaign, UN Habitat Advisor, IMPRI. Professor R.S. Ghuman ji, Professor of Eminence, Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar, visiting Professor, IMPRI. Professor Randhir Singh Rathore ji, Professor of Policy Planning and Research and Dean Academics of Affairs, Shri Vishwakarma Skill University, Haryana, visiting Professor, IMPRI. Professor SWARNA SADASIVAM VEPA ji, visiting Professor, Madras School of Economics, visiting Professor, IMPRI. Professor Sarthi Acharya ji, Professor Delhi Chair, Institute for Human Development, New Delhi, former Director, Institute of Development Studies, Jaipur. Professor Ashok Pankaj ji, Professor, Council for Social Development, New Delhi. We are extremely grateful to have such a distinguished panel of experts joining us today. Proceeding further, I welcome all the participants to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and efforts into understanding the nuances of gender and social inclusion within the Union Budget, while helping us to bring together the practitioners and participants through this course for impactful discussion. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor and privilege to invite Professor Suchita Krishnaprasad ji to start the program with the chair's opening remarks and proceed with the panel discussion. Over to you, ma'am.
So we are trying to still get Professor Acharya online. So requesting Professor Arjun Kumar to please contact with Professor Acharya. So with that, after a V-shaped recovery post-COVID, the Indian economy is said to be on a strong wicket and is resilient in the face of geopolitical challenges. The economy has consolidated its recovery with a prudent mix of fiscal and monetary measures, ensuring economic and financial stability. It has manifested, and this has manifested in many ways. The first being a 7% plus growth rate. In fact, the nominal GDP growth rate has been something like 9.6% on year basis. The headline inflation rate is largely under control, though food inflation continues to be a problem because it directly affects the livelihood. The trade deficit has declined, the current account deficit has declined. In fact, there was a surplus in current account deficit in the last quarter of the previous financial year. The foreign exchange reserves are said to be ample, equity markets are said to be buoyant. The repatriation of investment has increased in the last years. from US dollars 29.3 billion in financial year 23 to 44.5 billions in financial year 24. The financial performance of the corporate sector has been like never before. The results of a sample of 33,000 companies show that in the 3 years from 2020 to 2023, the profits have actually quadrupled. Also, the gross fixed capital formation rate has grown at a cumulative rate of 52% in the post-COVID period till 2023. And this, the current economic survey attributes it to the tax cuts given, to tax cuts announced for capital formation. So this is all a good picture of Indian economy so far. And how does it reflect on livelihood? If corporates have invested, they're earning more profits. So how does it reflect on the livelihoods on ground? Has it increased the jobs? Surprisingly, the jobs in manufacturing have, in fact, declined. The economic survey notes a reduction of 54 lakh workers in the manufacturing sector. And though there has been a rise in the number of people employed in the services sector, one cannot deny that this rise in service sector might be more of a push factor than of a pull factor, because most people in service sector, there is a large number of people who are own account workers and their employment conditions and their livelihood might be of a questionable quality. So what holds our growth story back from trickling down? It is the hesitation of the private sector, as even this economic survey notes. And this, in spite of the rise in the gross fixed capital formation rate. This economic survey has clearly expressed the wish that finally it is now turn of the private sector to pick up the baton from the government, which has played its part. There has been a steady reduction in the revenue expenditure, which is what the government did the last several budgets post-COVID, and they have been, and sometimes this cut in the revenue expenditure has been at the cost of health and education subsidies, and it has been increasingly replaced by pushing up the capex to develop a robust physical infrastructure, all in an initiative to incentivize the private sector growth. Perhaps this finds a parallel in the state's inability to utilize the funds as well. The CAG reports that something like 27 major states have just reached about 33.5% of the total budgeted borrowings of the previous year. So is it that the corporate sector is simply going for capital formation without utilizing the capacity? And which is also, as we said, finds a parallel in the states. Given this background, the government now seems to be making one more attempt to push the employment in the private sector. This time by directly incentivizing the corporates to recruit the young graduates by announcing the employment-linked incentive scheme. Indeed, it would be interesting to see how that unfolds on the ground. A decent livelihood does not mean only more number of jobs. It means creation of meaningful and productive jobs. So it's the quality of jobs that also matter. The immediate corollary to this would be the skill development. How employable is our labor force is the next question. Having unemployable engineers, which is what our skill development report showed at one point, something like 7% of graduate engineers are employable, it said. This is 2017 report, of course. So having unemployable engineers is a huge waste of investable resources. Another area that is truly worrisome is income and wealth inequality. Despite the decline in the abject poverty, income inequality continues to be one of the highest in the world in India. In 2021, of course, we know all that the top 1% of India's population earned something like 21.7% of income, and for the bottom 50%, it was just 13.1. And the inequality grows sharper when we consider creation of wealth. What does this do to the economy? We all know that it traps the market size by restricting the consumption expenditure and shrinks the investment multiplier process. Arguably, the two most critical missing links that might have obstructed the much anticipated crowding in effect of the private investment in response to the phenomenal doses of capex we have seen in the past few budgets consistently could be unemployment and unequal income distribution. Rural distress has also been a cause of concern for some time, and the growing demand for Manrega is one of its manifestations. It is important to recollect that agriculture was the only sector during the pandemic which showed a positive growth rate. Today, the poor growth in agriculture is also because of the raging climate. Making agriculture climate resistance is one of the focus areas of this budget, and it will be important to see how we fare on this ground. The finance minister is also hopeful of the national policy of cooperatives making the growth in rural economy and generation of employment opportunities on a large scale possible in this sector. Providing better physical infrastructure has been a consistent focus of the union budget since the past few years, as we noted, under the banner of either Atmanirbhar Bharat or Gati Shakti, etc. This budget, interestingly, lists Vishnupada Temple corridor at Gaya and Mahabodhi Temple at Bodh Gaya in Bihar as one of the infrastructure projects. This is indeed a new way of understanding the infrastructure projects. So this is where one can round up. The macro numbers in the economy truly look glamorous, but the livelihood reality appears rather grim. There are more IITs today, but nearly 30% of the young IITians cannot find campus placements. School enrollment has increased, but the recent ASER report has disclosed poor capabilities of our young people, many of whom languish also due to undernourishment and hunger. It would be truly a challenge to place the dream of Vikasit Bharat on such shoulders. With that, can we now have Professor Sandeep Acharya to deliberate upon the position of manufacturing, overall manufacturing in contributing to better livelihoods, especially MSMEs and so on, how it is likely to contribute to the development of India or come to Vikasit Bharat. Professor Sandeep Acharya.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Chair. Let me begin with a very short proposition on the size of the labor force, which is about 50 crores right now, and the employment is about 46 crores. Now, adding to the labor force each year is about 1.2% according to government calculations, and this is about 2 to 2.5 crores per year. Unemployment is about 3 crores. So if we look at the elasticity, that is the capacity of the GDP to absorb labor, we have actually worked it out from 1972 right till 1923-24. It has been gradually decreasing, and only in the last year has it improved. But this improve is because of increase in the unpaid family workers and the self-employed, which means actually the wage employed sectors, which are considered, they are the ones which are really market friendly. They are the ones which are not creating jobs. So in the process, we have something called NEET. So we have unpaid family workers. We have a large number of self-employed, which have grown by 11 crores in the last 2 decades. Unpaid family workers have increased by 50 lakhs. And then we have NEET, that is the not in employment, education or training, which is 13% of men and 55% of women, which is really a waste. So we have to create something like 1 to 2 crores of jobs per year if we are serious about creating jobs. And let's face it, agriculture is not absorbing labor, it's rejecting labor on a continuous basis, as most of the cost of cultivation data suggest. And there's tractorization. There are no bullocks in the country anymore for all practical purposes. And each tractor replaces 8 pairs of bullocks, which means 8 pairs of people rather. So if we are talking about the budget, we are talking about 2 lakh crores to be spent on employment generation. This is what the finance minister had said. And this would be spent on skills, on incentives and internships. Now, I don't know how internships are going to create jobs because the onus is on the industry. And it's also voluntary, she said last evening. And incentives, well, they put it in the provident fund, which means they'll get it 30 years later. So it's not that they're going to get it 30 or 35, 40 years later, not right now. Then credit assessments with the banks. Now, they don't have yardsticks. They're saying they believe in external assessment. So these assessment yardsticks, when they go to 110,000 banks, it might take 2 to 3 years to really put it in place because people start getting transfers. And there are too many people to be trained for this. Then we talk about credit assessment within banks. We talk about stress period credit. We talk about credit guarantee schemes, SIDB, etc., to be expanded. Now, these are likely to have some impact, surely, but over a tapered period of time, 3 to 4 years. And I understand in the sense that this is the first budget, and they probably are planning for 5 years. But to expect any major changes in this particular year may not be possible. Now, we know that MSMEs are important from the point of view of the economy. They are 96% of all the enterprises in the country, and they provide 30+% of the industrial production and 40+% of the exports, which really talks about the fact what is the nature of exports we have in this country. MSMEs are much talked about, but MSMEs in India are not the same as MSMEs in Japan or Italy. If you look at some of these modern industries, the garages to Googles and garages to Microsofts don't happen in India because our MSMEs are leather, handicraft. Now, if you look at the 583 clusters, 75 to 90% of the clusters are primarily into khadi, handloom, handicraft, and such kinds of hosiery and such kinds of things. So to expect them to become big and create jobs is really problematic. And I had a talk with the CSIR on this quite some time, or rather we were having a talk with CSIR that I was working in India earlier. We had noticed that there is no R&D link with these people. Absolutely no R&D link as to how to improve the technology. So these people are going into agro-processing kinds of technologies, which could be probably as old as 1,000 years. We also note that the mortality rate in the MSME sector is about 25%. So when I was working in the ILO, we had worked out this number that it is about 25%. And the average salaries, which I'm not talking about some startups, I'm talking about across the board, average salaries are 8,000 to 10,000 rupees a month. And infrastructure marketing, we know the rural non-farm enterprises, what they are. Many of them are actually seasonal, like oil processing, cutting, or processing sugarcane, etc. These are seasonal. So they provide not necessarily a long-term proposition. Now, one of the key problems which I have faced with this budget is that the imports of electronics, footwear, and a large number of these solar equipments has come down, which means when we are talking about Atmanirbhar, and we are probably the largest producer of leather in the country, why are we wanting to import shoes from China? Why are we wanting to import electronics from China, plugs, etc., kinds of things which could be easily made in this country and in the small scale sector, but they have reduced the duties on this? Is it to please China? I'm not sure about it. But when I read the speech day before yesterday of the chief economic advisor, he says, yes, we have to plug in with China, even if you kill our soldiers on the border. I'm sorry, I'm being harsh, but that's the reality. Now, if we look at the supply side of labor, we are talking about average length of study in this country is only about 8 years, which I think the chair had also mentioned. And the mobility is only of men, and the mobility of women is extremely limited. I mean, if the average wage is 8 to 10,000 rupees, you can't expect a Saharanpur woman to go and work in Nasik or Coimbatore. It's just not possible. She didn't know the language. The house will probably be more expensive than that, and there are all kinds of other problems of mobility of these women from a social perspective. So we are talking about more of these people might just shrink into unpaid family worker. Now, so if we are talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat, GDP will definitely rise. But human development, will it rise or not, is very highly questionable. And therefore, if we are looking at Viksit Bharat, we have to talk about improving the quality of the workers and their wages, for which skill, quality, research, and development, all three are necessary. Now, skill, we are talking about, okay, people are getting loans and 10 lakhs of rupees to study in Indian universities. If you look at the quality of Indian universities, there are 60% of Indian universities which become private, and they make a lecturer sign on 80,000, they give them 25,000. So the quality of people which you get there are very poor. And of recent, we have looked at some of these teachers, their own fundamentals of mathematics are not clear. How will they transfer that knowledge to younger people when their own fundamentals are not clear? So we have serious problems of skill building, of improving institutions. We are talking about IITs of 25 years back. They were very good. Look at the IITs today, the new IITs. They are not getting staff. I am a product of IIT Kanpur. I know 40% of the staff today I mean, those posts are vacant. Why are they vacant? Because they're not getting the right kinds of people. So unless we get good people, unless we increase the skills of people, unless we ask people to go into education and make skill development a major proposition in the country, to expect the MSMEs to create jobs would be creating jobs for 8,000, which is basically creating jobs but spreading poverty. So what would happen is, on the one hand, you have Ambani weddings which spend what 4,000 or 5,000 crores of rupees. On the other hand, you are distributing food for 80 crores of people on subsidized basis. Now, that's not Atma Bharat according to me. Atmanirbhar Bharat. Atmanirbhar Bharat will require people to grow and people to create a country, and not for people to create a country, and not depend on Chinese technologies to come in here, and not depend upon every product to be made with foreign collaboration. Let's stop there. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. You have covered indeed a very wide canvas, from the MSMEs and their state of affairs to education and to skill development and to livelihood, and the problem of, in the passing, you've mentioned the kind of inequality that we have, and also whether we are truly working towards the Atmanirbhar. Of course, friend of mine, Rupa Rege Nitsure, who's an eminent economist in her own right, has once noted that perhaps this Atmanirbhar Bharat has raised the import duty so much and increased the cost of raw materials. That might be another debate, of course. But thank you so much for taking us from the manufacturing to its backward human link, which is education. So with that, can we move on to Mr. Sandeep Chachra? Can you just, since we have already spoken of the kind of unemployment, which is, as we said, my guide, Professor L.K. Deshpande, used to say, cheap labor is dear labor, right? So this kind of 8,000, 10,000 jobs, wages, may not really create a kind of economy which we are dreaming of. So, Mr. Chachra, over to you for looking at helping us to understand unemployment among youth, informal sector, urban and rural economies, and employment generation. And do you think the employment linked incentive scheme is really going to roll out effectively on the ground?
Thank you, Professor Krishnaprasad. And I'm sorry I missed the first part because I was disconnected of what you were asking me to do. But I want to thank you for opening this particular discussion on employment and livelihoods in agriculture. I think your first recital of what the issues are has very well laid out the span of issues and the challenges and where we are today. So thank you for that. Thank you for the colleagues at IMPRI to have me here. I'm aware there's limited time, as you reminded me rightly. So I'll try to be fairly headline-ish, and wonderful to hear Professor Acharya was speaking and I could listen to him with reference to MSMEs and more broadly the manufacturing sector. So my first point as a set of headlines for the discussions would be, it'd be a good idea to subject this analysis to a social class analysis, this budget to a social class analysis. in general, and obviously for the issues at hand, which are precisely employment, livelihoods, and agriculture in the today's discussion. A gender analysis of the budget has been done, including in the IMPRI series. A good idea to look at the class analysis of the budget. I don't think enough of that is normally done, certainly not in the mainstream media channels, but even somewhat in the kind of discourses that we are engaged with. So much more is needed. Having said that, my second point is more generally on the budget. This budget responds to, in my view, to a very closely fought election. So call it whichever, but it responds to the social messaging which was predominant from the ground, from the vast majorities of our working people on the ground, articulated through different political parties, but even otherwise, but also to kind of concerns that there were. And also, of course, and this has been talked about in media for long, response to the political coalition politic necessities. And I think this is good. In the longer sense, in democratic politics, this is good. An attempt is being made. So let me celebrate that attempt to begin with. How good it is, how much more is needed is something we're going to talk about. Now, in general, that's what I would like to say. The third point I'd like to say is, given that we are discussing employment, and you asked me to specifically look at that and not agriculture, I'll kind of limit it there. There may be some overlap areas, as you, in your opening, Professor Krishnaprasad, mentioned that, because it's not in neat categories of urban, rural, private, non-private story. Yeah. Now, just prior to the budget, as you again mentioned, the economic survey gave a hint of what's in store. In the economic survey, the chief economic advisor seemed to be appealing to the industry, to the private sector, to get more people. So within the first 30 minutes of the finance minister's speech, you had the question of jobs come up. It's great that it did come up after a long while. And I think the economic survey said what? The economic survey recognized a problem which has been there, and therefore the need of labor-intensive industrialization. Professor Sarthi was speaking to some aspects on the quality of jobs and so on and so forth, which remains a challenge, but at least a recognition of need for labor-intensive industrialization was recognized. And I think it's a social discussion, and I'm glad that this is happening. But what the economic survey, and we all know as people who work on the ground, as academics, as researchers, that the share of labor in capital formation, you spoke to capital formation this morning, Professor Krishnaprasad, has been continuously reducing. I mean, it is a long story of the long past, but even if you were to take the last 20 years, there has been a steady decline, a secular decline, if I may call it. Now, having said that, we knew in some ways that the state is essentially saying that the private sector going ahead through that economic survey needs to be the main employer. And lo and behold, as you rightly mentioned, a slew of, I would have said, the state's job, or welfare state's job, is just not creating jobs through the private sector, but also looking at direct employment options, which I'll come to, and you refer to MGA and REGA. There are many such other avenues. But the hint was quite clear, and the pathway is also quite clear in the budget, that by creating jobs, largely we are looking at, the budget is looking at job creation in what is called private, corporate, whatever you call it, industry. And therefore, instead of going for strong regulation measures, this budget seems to have taken the softer approach to begin with. Let's see how it unravels, of incentivizing employment. So you have a range of measures which you counted. They have their own operational challenges. Let me take the question of internships. Now, internships being spoken are about 1 crore in the next 5 years in top 500 companies. The total employee strength, average employee strength of these top 5 companies would be about 15 to 18,000. And we are looking at roughly about 4,000 interns per year to be absorbed in these companies. So there are operational challenges. Can companies absorb them? Can they do? I'm not talking about, you're right. The economic survey did mention that the profits have quadrupled So the accumulation has quadrupled, and who's stealing it, and the questions of inequality, all those things have been sort of talked off. In any case, the other operational difficulties. All of these incentive programs, employer and employee both, with an emphasis on employer in this case, are linked to what is called the EPFO mechanism, the Provident Fund mechanism. So assume that there's a formalization of economy. We may argue that this is a good direction or a bad direction. We'll come to that, because it assumes that in the next couple of years, in the next 5 years to be precise, if the pathways laid out, a large chunk of the economy would be formalized. Whether it is possible, whether it is desirable, these are debates out in the open, but I like to flag it off. Having said that, let me also then move on to say that in the range of measures which we haven't spoken to are others, apart from direct employment sort of incentives. There are others such as peripheral but central issues, in my opinion: workers' hostels, industrial workers' hostel in a PPP mode, women workers' hostel, creche facilities, and some of the issues Professor Acharya was referring to, sort of credit guarantees to MSMEs, startup ecosystem through abolition of angel tax. Now, all of these definitely will encourage, in my opinion, further augment control of private sector as the main employee creation method. Now, the question is as follows. Even if we take this line, we know that going ahead, labor-intensive industrialization may be a dream, but the global headwinds or the national headwinds, for various reasons, including technology and artificial intelligence, is unlikely to sort of support it or, realize it in practice. It's quite clear if you look at the trends of the past, if you look at how labor quality of jobs, Professor Acharya, you were speaking to, but if you look at the industrial trends for the last 20 years, and an annual survey of industry is a good indicator, the extent of contractualization of workers in industry is massively increased, from about 23% in 2002-03 to about 40% or thereabouts in 2022-23, and it's only further increasing. So we are creating what Professor Acharya referred to in terms of numbers, sub-employment or lower quality employment, lower quality of labor rights or hardly any labor rights. A pathway where social insurance or social security is you are out of as you are contractualizing labor. This is not only happening in the private sector. The same trend is quite visible where government is the employer. Take railways, take defense. I mean, one can go on and on. We don't have the time. But there is a worrying trend. Secondly, the wage depression, which I don't want to go into. But the wage depression, it's pretty clear that it's also in the private sector. You gave some numbers, Professor Acharya, of 8,000 and so on and so forth. But if you go outside of the formal sector, the wage depression is even more. So something that the opposition party is obviously raising it, quite not enough. But having said this, now if you look at a class analysis, this budget, as far as employment is concerned, focuses on formal sector. We know focuses on young people. You asked, yes, it's welcome. It's really welcome because it will create jobs of some kind, sub-jobs, whatever, for largely middle class, of course, is a wide segment and segmentation is necessary. Middle class is not more than a third of Indian population. In fact, less than a third of the Indian population. And once again, it's a debatable sort of, it's another debate of what is really middle class. The Prime Minister recently announced a new word called the neo-middle class. So whether that's really where it falls, where it goes in 1 year's time is again open to debate. As a head highlight, let me put it. Having said that, these jobs are likely to go there. First of all, they're formal. Second of all, there's a skill question. An informal worker, a fish worker, an agricultural worker is unlikely to get those jobs at the current existing skill level. So you almost have a situation where almost all of these employment benefits, even if I look at CAPEX related trickle-down economics. CAPEX remains at 3.4% of the GDP. It maintains the interim budget level, and assumedly it's for infrastructure, some of which you talked about. It's another debate, what kind of infrastructure. But having said it, it largely lands in the hand of companies, contractors, with only very trickle-down effect to frontline labor employment. This is the story that I largely see. The chief economic advisor in the same economic survey referred to, the recent one, spoke of 78.5 lakh jobs to be created every year until 2030. This trend is not there. I mean, this is the measures announced don't quite get us there. So therefore, the question then arises, what does the state need to do? And therefore, the argument, which has been there in the social space, that government must step its welfare state role as a direct employer, either through the public sector. Once again, that's another discussion we need to have, or through direct employment creation methods, some of which you referred to. Now, one of the employment creation methods was the dream under the directive principles of the state policy of installing a right to work as a fundamental right. But we got somewhere halfway there in the sense of employment guarantees in rural India. Look at MGNREGA budget. Quite apart from the fact this budget has nothing to offer for urban employment, but even if you look at the MGNREGA budget, the MGNREGA budget is at best static. At worst, it's declining. So 86,000 crores is the revised estimates of last year. It's the same allocations. If you look at 2 years ago, but on the other hand, if you look at demand, between the last 4 years, between 2019, 2020 and 2022, 23, the number of demand, which is reflected in the numbers of MGNREGA at very sub wages, grew by about 40 crore person days. So it was 265 crore person days in 2019, 2020, and by 22, 23, it had jumped up to 305 crore person days. So you know that huge demand. So I quickly conclude.
Yeah.
So in this story, if you look at now the class dimension, 90% of India's workforce, which is in the informal sector, which are and almost a formation of a new social class, which we call out of work people, or largely out of work people, what is another jargon also called wage hunters and gatherers of India. They have no sort of avenue at the moment. MGNREGA sort of restricts. The cooperative story is yet to take up. It's a welcome step that a national cooperation policy has been announced. We need to see what it is. The FPO story is yet to take off to scale. So the idea of solidarity economy is, let's say, in its infancy even now. The collective forms of, sort of labor for creating welfare, for creating livelihood, self-livelihood, livelihoods with autonomy and dignity for the large number of laboring millions of very oppressed, historically oppressed groups and currently dealt out with inequality. That social group, which is a large chunk, certainly more than 60% of our population. So I think there's a big problem there. Now, if you look at quickly, and I'll try and conclude, Prof, there's lots more, but I'll try and conclude the question of rural India. Having said it, it's interesting that this budget notes land reforms. So I was like excited, like hell, to see the idea of land reforms coming into a budget. But very soon one realized this is about land use surveys, digitization of land records, but without the core of it, which is land redistribution, which is about giving land to the tiller. I mean, it has really no meaning. Rather, it can have a regressive sort of outcome in terms of further annihilation or stealing of lands. Caste-based work. It's not. So there is a whole range of things in a wider sense. Let me just put it that perhaps the role of the state, which is completely missing in this budget, a direct role of the state in creating employment at the hands of people, at the hands of a large battalion of informal workers, struggling millions of our country, is something that was a total miss, in my opinion, in this budget, giving rise to a thinking that at best it's trickle-down economics with reference to how we look at social classes, how we look at employment, and how we look at creation of livelihoods. So there's lip service to everything, but without really the substance to it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chachra, for taking us from, again, putting across a very wide range of issues in front of us. The kind of entitlement and the loss of entitlement and coming up to the land reform, which of course would be taken up probably by Professor Ghuman, because he will be speaking more on rural economy. My point was that when you are bringing in employment-linked incentive scheme, a similar scheme which existed a couple of budgets ago, productivity-linked incentive schemes, have we reviewed that? Have you reviewed that before extending it to employment as well, before extending it to the labor market as well? So there is no comment on this study in the economic survey as to why we might want to extend it to labor market as well. Coming to the class thing, I remember the Azim Premji report on working in India, which shows how the labor market outcomes in India are so rigid and so much still governed by the caste divisions. And with that, can we move on to Professor Ashok Pankaj, uh, Professor and former Director of Council of Social Development, New Delhi? Uh, his area of expertise has been inclusive growth. And so may I request him to please deliberate on the Vikasit Bharat concept and how inclusive growth can take place over a period of time? What do we look, going forward, where do we see this? And if we are dependent on MNREGA, what does it mean for a Vikasit Bharat and what does it mean for inclusive growth? Of course, Mr. Chachra has already mentioned the class divisions, and I have just now mentioned the caste divisions which affect the labor market outcomes. So over to Professor Ashok Pankaj.
Thank you very much, Professor Suchita Krishnaprasad. So let me begin with the concept of inclusive development, which came in discourse of policy making in India in the prominently during the 11th five-year plan. And 11th five-year plan very succinctly underlined the problem of exclusive or other problem, the lack of inclusive development in terms of the growth has not been sufficiently inclusive for many groups. It targets the social groups, especially scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, minorities. It also underlines the problem of growth not trickling down to gender as well, to women as well. So some social groups, the 11th five-year plan identifies the group which need to be targeted for promoting inclusive growth. And then in terms of its vision, apart from the various other measures, the one prominent thing which it underlined to promote during 11th five-year plan and also in the 12th five-year plan was employment-centric inclusive growth policy. And for that matter, it defines what it means by employment-centric growth policy is the ability to generate and educate number of productive employment opportunities will be a major factor in which the inclusiveness of growth will be judged. India is currently at a stage of demographic transition where population growth is slowing down, but the population of young people entering the labor force continues to expand. So the challenge which 11th five-year plan has identified for Indian economy, which was growing very fast and of course grew very fast, particularly in the 10th five-year plan, continues to be there. This budget, if I look this budget, to what extent it has been able to address this problem of promoting inclusive growth through employment. There are, of course, some positive aspects, but more than that, this budget I look more in terms of addressing some of the concerns, some of the other political and electoral concerns which emerged from the recent elections when the ruling party lost 63 seats and 53 seats were in rural areas. So in one way, this budget is an attempt also to address the grievances of the rural constituencies and to give a message to the rural population that, look, this government is working for you also. And intention is to promote some employment based inclusion of rural area, not specifically employment based inclusion of some certain groups, which was defined in 11th five-year plan. Nonetheless, this is a welcome measure, and I appreciate for the effort to give some kind of emphasis to promoting employment-centered inclusive growth in the coming years. In this direction, there are two major announcements in this budget. One is to promote employment by providing incentive to the private sector, and other is to create some skills. And another important measure is to also give some incentive, or rather very profound incentives to MSME, considering that probably MSME is going to be the major provider of employment in the coming years. So these two aspects of the budget, one is to target young population, new worker who are going to enter into the labor market, who are going to enter into the employment sector, provide incentive to the private sector to promote employment among this new working age population. And second is to encourage MSME by giving some incentives to them, are very important measure in terms of promoting employment-centric growth in the coming years. But then this needs to be looked more carefully in terms of to what extent this policy has been drafted very carefully. Before that, I just to explain a little bit about economic survey, because this budget also draws on some of the suggestions of the economic survey. Economic survey, in fact, said that we need to create 78.5 lakh per annum job, and for that matter, it also makes a statement that private sector's profitability is at a 15-year high. And then in a way, it suggests that perhaps this private sector should be made to respond to this problem of unemployment or to create jobs in the country. But when we look at the budget document, then perhaps there is some kind of disjuncture between this announcement putting responsibility on the private sector in terms of meeting the responsibility of creating 78.5 lakh per annum job creation, and then in terms of the actual obligation of the private sector, there seems to be some kind of gap between the announcement in the economic survey as well as and in the budget document. Up to that, let me now come to the announcement, and then we will relate this with the economic survey statement. In terms of job creation, this budget has relied heavily on providing incentives in terms of asking the private sector, including informal sector, to enroll people, and then government will give an incentive. There are three schemes which government has announced. The details of the scheme are yet to be rolled out. But the first is to provide DBT of 15,000 in 3 installments with a limit of rupees 15,000, that is under the EP Employment Provident Fund provision, with a person who are getting a maximum salary of 1 lakh rupees. And government targets to provide this benefit to 2.1 crore people per annum. Now the question is that this benefit is 15,000, which will be given to the beneficiary. But how will you ensure that the employment is first created? This benefit will flow only if somebody gets employment. The challenge is that we have to first create employment. So this benefit is in a kind of, I would say, in a kind of post-dated check, which we do not know whether it will be in cash or not. So that is that is the challenge with this first aspect of this incentive. The second incentive is to, in a way, incentivize private sectors or other informal sector to become formal. For that matter, I say that if you link the government provident fund, then the government will provide you some kind of incentives in terms of contributing to the provident fund. Now, the problem with the informal sector has been that they don't want to become formal. Many of the small units, they don't want to become formal. Now, is this incentive sufficient enough to induce them to join formal? Because they will, in any case, they will weigh both cost and benefit. They have their own calculation, whether this will be sufficient, this incentive will be sufficient to for them to come to join as a formal sector or to become a formal sector. That remains a major challenge. So when this program will be rolled out, these implications will be there. And then at this budget talks about as a part of this scheme also the skill creation, that so much of a skill, 20 lakh youth will be a skill over 5 years through existing centrally sponsored schemes. And then as a part of this, there is a program of internship program with a target of 1 crore youth who will be provided internship benefit of 5,000 per month for 1 year, and 6,000 rupees as a kind of one-time assessment. The target of this group, or the responsibility, this has been fixed on 500 companies. But who are going to be these 500 companies? The budget has not defined whether it is 500 company. Most probably it is going to be in terms of the turnover or maybe the profits. That has to be defined. Once the scheme is rolled out, then we will come to know that which are the company which are in the top 500 company, whether it is based on the value turnover or in the profit. So that has to be defined. Now the question is that if you look at the 500 top companies in the recent years, most of the companies, the top companies who are making a lot of profits or whose turnover is also very high, are in sectors which are not very employment incentives, or not very employment intensive. So say for example, software industry, how can we expect the soft industries will provide 5,000 for about 4,000, one company will accommodate 4,000 interns as a part of this, because this also requires the question of the qualifications, whether the interns will have. Now software industry has specific kind of qualifications, whether all youth are going to be who are seeking internship or seeking employment are MCA or BCA. So this needs to be looked more carefully, and then how once the program gets rolled out, then these implications will be there. But my concern is that perhaps this is not a full-fledged measure to address the problem of skill generation. But then the positive side of that announcement, which I see in this budget, is to upgrading 1,000 industrial training institutes, because most of the industrial training institutes are languishing due to lack of infrastructure, due to lack of faculty members. And then recently also there was some kind of approach to casualize even the scaling process. So some of the schemes, I would come to 1 and 2 schemes which highlighted as a prominent scheme by this government, like Deen Dayal Kausal Yojana, which was to skill rural youth in particular. And if you look at the evaluation of some of these schemes, then the results are not very positive. For example, even I happened to visit some of these skill generating centers, and there were couple of problems with this whole scheme. First is that what kind of a skill you are generating, what kind of trade you have opted for. Most of the centers were looking for very convenient kind of trade where they can ensure employment for 6 months, because the responsibility was to provide employment for 6 months. After that, what has happened to this training? Nobody is going to take responsibility for that. I was examining one center in Tripura, and this were providing training in nursing. And there was a tie-up with the Apollo hospitals. Then most of the rural youths who were getting training, they were sent to Bangalore. Initially, they were absorbed for 6 months in the Apollo hospitals, but most of them were not retained. One reason also, they were not willing to stay there because of the amount which they were earning, 7,000 to 8,000. From Tripura rural areas, you send somebody to Bangalore with 7,000, 8,000 rupees, definitely he will come back. So this training was not very successful in many of the trade. Similarly, I was examining one center in Muzaffarpur of Bihar, and they were giving training in this BPO. Now I asked this organizer, this manager of the training center, that how can you expect to train somebody in language in 3 months? Most of the participants had come from rural areas. They had got education in their non-English language. So for them, we expect that in 3 months, you can provide sufficient training in language in which they will have to communicate. So this seems to be some kind of problem with this training skill generation program with the previous, which has been part of the government flagship program for a pretty long time. In that scenario, this announcement of upgrading 1,000 ITI is rather a very welcome measure, and I would suggest that perhaps we can have more ITI with more robust infrastructure instead of going for this kind of short-term arrangement, either through this Deen Dayal Upadhyay Kaushal Yojana or through this internship through the private sector, both look to be very short-term and in a way lack of proper vision as well in terms of skill generation is not that much a short process. And many of the sectors in which we need skills even for day-to-day activities, there is hardly the training institutions, for example, for mason, carpenter. We don't have sufficient number of people who are trained, and most of them, even the new sectors which are emerging, for example, repairing of this smartphone, repairing of laptop, most of the people are doing by trial and error basis. We have not provided sufficient training. So the skill generation, the focus on a skill generation is of course welcome. With one rider that this skill generation should be examined more in terms of a long-term process, which should also be linked to education, because unless until you have a good education up to secondary level, you can't expect somebody to be provided a good training in a skill after 10th if he has not done good schooling. So these are two connected things, and one should look this whole process in a more holistic manner than to be a very short-term measure that you ask some companies to provide internship for 1 year and then assuming that the person will be trained, another person will become employable, more employable. So that seems to be a problem. But the most important thing which I see in terms of employment generation is that schemes which have been announced for the MSME. The finance minister in her budget speech mentioned that she had announced 8 measures for the promoting employment or promoting MSC as a whole, because MSC is the largest employer in the country with 20 crore people getting employment in MSC. There are 2.7 crore MSC units in the country. The most important things out of the various measures, I would highlight 2 pages. One is that the credit guarantee up to 100 crore is going to be a game changer for MSME, because most of the MSME really struggle for credit guarantee, and they don't have the collateral assets, really much collateral assets to put forward to get the loans. They struggle for getting loans. So again, it will be seen that how this scheme is rolled out, but the intention is very clear. The government is going to push the bank to provide in a liberal manner without much insistence on collateral, and there is also provision for some kind of credit guarantee fund. So this is going to be a kind of significant provision, and this should also a kind of game change in terms of. Another important provision is that MSME threshold for MSME to join this trades and online platform to help MSME unlock their working capital by converting their receivable into cash. That is also a kind of important measure which has been announced for the MSME. So if the 2 measures are to be assessed, in my view, this is going to be more important and more in terms of giving better outcome than the other announcement which have been done, because other announcements have some kind of rider, some kind of provisions which are not under the control of the government. But this is something which can be easily delivered. Then coming to this Manrega scheme that the moderator has highlighted and expected me to talk about. This economic survey has raised one issue that poorer states are not getting adequate fund when you compare in terms of the poor population which are concentrated in those states. This is true. In fact, this is nothing new in this statistics. From the very beginning, we have seen that some of the poorer states, which were expected to rather get more benefit from the program, were not able to get benefit. There are multiple reasons for that, but some of the poorer states, the story is not simple as well. Rajasthan was able to get good amount of benefit from the Manrega from the very beginning. Himachal got it, Madhya Pradesh got it. Some of the states picked up later or not in the initial stage. So it's not a kind of very linear trajectory that the states which were performing better have been performing. Of course, some of the states from the very beginning have been performing better, but some of the states have also picked up in recent years. That makes this story incomplete. Nonetheless, the major problem which I see with this program is that with too much expectation loaded in the program over the course of a year have also created administrative responsibility, which poorer states' institutional capacities are not adequate enough to meet. And that is one fundamental reason. Of course, economic survey has also highlighted these aspects of inadequate capacity of the state. But then there are some other regions also which have not come much in the discourse. One is that I feel that sometimes when there is political interest in the scheme, it pushes the implementation. For example, West Bengal, though CPI, CPM was the part of the drafting of this scheme, this whole employment guarantee scheme. But during their tenure, the employment guarantee scheme was not implemented very effectively in West Bengal. Once Trinamool Congress came to power, Trinamool Congress prioritized this scheme, and we have seen that the scheme was doing very well in West Bengal. Similarly, Uttar Pradesh picked up recently in implementation of this scheme. So this needs to be more carefully, and there are multiple factors which explain this dynamics. I would aim with one and two remarks. First is that this budget has definitely given attention to employment creation with a focus on rural area as well. If you look at the budget also, 2.6 crore for rural development, 1.5 crore for agriculture development, together almost 4 lakh crore of a budget of 42 lakh crore, almost 10% of the budget is going to. So the priority the government has given priority to rural agriculture. That is a welcome because majority of population is stayed here. Second thing is that government has understood the problem of government has recognized that employment is a real problem for our economy. Even we have big infrastructure project, but we must give attention to the employment generation. So this giving priority to employment generation, recognition of the fact that we have the employment problem is a welcome measure. How the government will address that, we will have to see. But government has, of course, taken some important major initiative in the sector of MSME that we have to see how it will be rolled out. Third thing is that this skill generation and employment creation, this should be seen in holistic manner. It should not be seen as a kind of some programmatic attempt to address this problem. This has to be seen more in terms of larger issues. For example, skill generation has to be seen in terms of also education. What kind of education, what kind of quality we are providing. Similar employment generation has to be seen more in terms of overall environment of the economy and other conditions. With these, I will end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for providing a very detailed picture based on your own personal experience and your studies in various states on how skill development is working and it's not working. Thank you very much for also highlighting that it's a probably long-awaited recognition that employment needs to be looked at and rural distress has to be addressed. So these are, of course, points that the government seems to have realized. And also thank you for pointing out once again how these may not work if there are some kind of simply stopgap arrangements like announcing incentive schemes and so on. Incentive you may declare, but it depends on, as you said, the cost-benefit analysis that the person who will accept those incentives. And once, and so thank you very much for a very detailed review of what the government has understood and what the government is trying to do, where it might succeed and where it needs to work harder to go for a long-term perspective. If we are looking at, if our budgets talk about next 25 years, then the policies that we announce need to be worked out with detail and make sure that there are no leakages and make sure that they are the intentions translate on the ground. Thank you very much for your deliberation. Can I, Professor Randhir Singh Rathore, also specializes on skill development, education, and use of green technology. So how does that translate into and get reflected in the budget? Professor Rathore, can we have your presentation?
Thank you, Professor Suchita, and thanks to IMPRI team for inviting me on this panel discussion. I think regarding the skill development, livelihood opportunities, whatever was discussed in the economic survey as well as budget. So my earlier speakers have touched upon most of the points basically. So I will not repeat any of the point, but quickly I will say that for the first time, when the economy survey was talking about to create around 1 crore job per year, so the government has announced these 5 different schemes about which my earlier speakers was talking about to create 1 crore jobs per year through these different schemes. But I would like to take the point what Professor Sarthi was mentioning. And somewhere Professor Ashok also touched upon that. Professor Ashok said that these schemes may be post-dated check. And in order to realize that check, or in order to make encash those checks basically, so what Professor Sarthi was mentioning, I will just recode that, probably that is most relevant. That is the quality basically. Means in almost all platforms, you will agree that the industry, either MSMEs or the bigger industries, they are talking about the quality of resources which actually they are going. And they are saying that since the quality is not appropriate, that's why they are finding challenges. And you also in your opening remarks rightly mentioned that some reports are quoting that even the engineers are not employable. So now the question is that how to improve the quality, and the owners cannot completely come or cannot be completely owned by the educational institution or the skill development setup basically, but due to the limitation of bandwidth basically. So one of the scheme which was announced by the finance minister was upgrading ITIs. But if we will see the numbers, so out of 15,000 ITIs, we are saying that we are going to upgrade 1,000 ITIs. So 1,000 ITI for 20 lakh students ultimately in 5 years. So I want to say that actually that is not sufficient. So how to leverage the other schemes or other facilities which are available with us? So I would just quickly like to just recap those 2 earlier schemes. One was the National Apprenticeship Training Scheme, another was National Apprenticeship Promotion Scheme. So basically, if suppose you want to give, everybody is talking about the quality training, and we know our limitation, because if suppose we are talking about skilling, especially in the field of engineering, technology, or manufacturing side, so the setup which is required, they are very, very capital incentive intensive, and it is difficult to put that much capital in many educational or ITIs or skill training centers. So the way which was devised to give educational component or training on the educational components in the educational institution, and for on-the-job training or for the internship or for the apprenticeship part, the government launched those 2 schemes. One was launched way back, that was apprenticeship training scheme, but NAPS was recently launched in 2000, I think 19, or most probably 19. And through these schemes, the students are, or the trainers are basically going to industry. They are exposed to real work time situation, and they are getting the training, and those training are basically what is the requirement in the industries. So such type of the mechanism was need of the hour basically. And looking to that aspect, I think another scheme of this internship was introduced by the government this time also. So when we are saying that a new scheme is again introduced, and which is talking about to create 1 crore internship over a period of 5 years, what will be the nitty-gritties and the operational aspect? Definitely everything will be clear once that complete scheme document will be released. But at least 1 or 2 points I would like to mention here. First is that when we are saying that 500 industries, 500 divided by 1 crore, I think it should be considered differently. Big industries, if industries are big, obviously they are operating in the shifts. So 500 multiplied by 3, we can say that they are operating in 3 shifts basically. So instead of saying 500 companies, it is basically, they may come out to be 1500, that number, if the shift aspect is taken into consideration. So basically giving exposure in such big companies definitely will help the quality of students basically passing out from the conventional higher educational institution. So the scheme basically, this particular scheme is talking about this internship opportunity for the students or for the pass out basically in the age group from 21 to 24 years basically. So if suppose such students are exposed to the industries or the companies, so they will their quality of training, their quality of learning will be enhanced, and that quality or that learning can further be harnessed by MSMEs also. Means when they are trained, means this 1 lakh interns are trained in bigger companies, the experience of those learnings they can bring back to MSMEs, suppose if they join some MSMEs, and I'm sure that this MSMEs will be benefited from the experiential learning which these interns will bring with them while getting training in these big companies. Another aspect of looking how I perceive this this aspect, that when we are giving training to students in big companies, so it opens another perspective, altogether a new perspective, and that perspective is of entrepreneurial mindset. Uh, what just quickly I will say that what we are doing in our university, because we are a different university, we are a scale university. So this practice we are using in our university, that all students are going for internship in companies basically. So once a student is going to a company for internship, it enhances self-confidence of that student and develops that entrepreneurial mindset. So instead of going back to serve somewhere or going back to find job somewhere, these students at time are looking forward for their startups also, or for looking forward to start their own venture also. So that may be looked from that perspective also, that this 1 crore interns will support the MSME ecosystem in the country. At the same time, they will also support the startup ecosystem of the country. They will be job creator on one hand. On the other hand, when they are facilitating the other institute or the MSMEs or industry. One more point, because you mentioned that about the green energy or green technology. So again, lot of opportunities are created in this budget through this through this new initiative. The 1 crore solar, the one project was 1 crore solar rooftop installation. So if suppose 1 crore solar rooftop installations are there, so in order to install this, I'm not touching the manufacturing side, I'm just touching the scaling side. There will be a huge demand for skilled resources for installation of the solar panels. There will be a huge demand for electricians basically for completing this electricity connection. So this green technology initiative or clean technology initiatives will again going to create a new set of job if suppose appropriate skills are given to the candidate, given to the students. And two more points which were discussed in this budget. One was pump storage project, and another was discussion on the smaller nuclear power plant. So obviously, means a lot of employment cannot be created in these two fields. But again, these are the niche areas. These areas are talking about the clean energy. And again, some capacity building can be done in these areas. And these students or this candidate trained in this new clean energy technology areas, they can find employability. Last point, just I would like to touch, you also mentioned that apart, means when we are talking about creation of jobs, so apart from looking just to MSME or industry, you rightly mentioned that the tourism was another area. And investment is the infrastructure investment in tourism and job creation in tourism will again be another aspect which can be given a fresh thought. So these were my initial comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Rathore. And I think since you are experienced in exposing students to apprenticeship and skill development, you could speak more authentically about how it can improve and kind of broaden the way and the perspective of students, not from just the point of view of engaging in a better job, but also becoming a startup on their own. So thank you very much. And now it's time for SWARNA madam. She will be, madam, will you be speaking on agriculture and farm incomes and agriculture as, the processing side of the agriculture, and agriculture is a sector that provides nutrition to so many. Thank you so much, ma'am. Can you please unmute yourself, ma'am? SWARNA ma'am?
1 second.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I think I've already sent my PPT, but then I'll be talking. No, it's not necessary to show the PPT, but at the same time, I will not be talking so much on agriculture. But since you mentioned it, I think I'll make some comments on the problems of agriculture, and then how the labor force in fact is declining in agriculture and various other issues. But I'm more interested in talking about the state of the labor market and the changes that have been brought into the labor market because of the technology changes. We all know that the technology has changed over a period of time. And what has happened is that it has created a new job markets, and then some of the existing job markets have already have disappeared. So I think that is the point which I'll be stressing upon more, because a lot of other speakers have already spoken about the proposed policy initiatives and the likely impact, whether they'll be able to fulfill the goal of sort of providing sufficient employment for the number of youth who have been coming into the labor force. Now, I want to concentrate on 2 or 3 points. The first one is the growth in employment. The growth in employment has been tardy. In fact, the elasticity of growth with respect to employment, in fact, has fallen over a period of time. It used to be something like 1% elasticity in 70s. It has now come to something like 0.1% now. So that itself shows us that the growth is, in fact, is not job oriented, and that's why we call it a jobless growth. So obviously, if you have to create employment with a 0.1% elasticity, our growth will have to be very high, something as high as 10%, which doesn't seem to be the case, because I think the present scenario, we are not expecting anything more than 6.5 to 7% growth. And so that, of course, many people have pointed out that is not sufficient to sort of absorb the jobless youth who are entering into the job market every year. So about 18 million youth who attain the age of 18, enter the job market looking for jobs. And then what is more important is to understand who are these people, and what is happening to the job market is something very important. What is happening is the job market has changed. It has changed all over the world, and it has come to India much later. I think the recent ILO report on labor, in fact, has highlighted these aspects, and particularly they've looked into low-skilled jobs, no-skilled jobs, and middle-skilled jobs, and high-skilled jobs. And so when we talk about skill and skilling, we should know what sort of skills are required and what sort of skills we have. And based on that, I think some matching will have to be done. So what has happened over a period of time the world over, and also in the case of India, is that the middle-level jobs have disappeared. We have high-skilled jobs, which are few, but at the same time, the low-skilled, no-skilled jobs, in fact, have been disappearing in the manufacturing sector, but they're still, and only the middle and the high-skills jobs are there in the manufacturing sector. But recently, ever since 2022, what has happened is the low-skilled jobs, in fact, are, more people are in the, more percentage of people are in the low-skilled and no-skilled jobs, because no-skilled jobs are basically the agriculture and construction. And of course, I'll talk about construction a little later. And then the high-skilled jobs are in the high-skilled service sector and the manufacturing sector. So what is happening over a period of time is that the medium and high-skilled jobs have been absorbing, jobs are there, and then the formal sector, in fact, is increasing their employment slightly by about 1%. But whereas the unorganized sector jobs, in fact, have fallen. There's something very interesting, particularly in the manufacturing. The GDP share of the organized sector is about 70%, roughly, and that of the unorganized sector is something like 33%. Whereas, as far as the jobs are concerned, about 75% of the jobs are in the unorganized sector, and there are only about 30% of the jobs are in the organized sector. And again, the organized sector, in fact, has not been, have been hit by what is called this polarization of jobs. That is, the very high skilled jobs are there, but then automation and other things have completely made certain types of jobs disappear. For example, you don't need a front office help. You don't need an accountant, and you don't need a back office staff either. So all of them have been automated, and also in the manufacturing sector also they have been automated. And now what is happening is a large number of jobs have disappeared, and it happened in the software sector also. As the software sector, in fact, has upgraded to the more automation. Everything you get on the web, and you don't have to hire a software engineer to do your the work which is related to your salaries or any such thing, because everybody can go into the website and do the work. And so these jobs, in fact, have disappeared. And then the next important aspect is about the manufacturing sector itself. The manufacturing sector, the job creation, in fact, is happening slightly in the organized sector, but then in the unorganized sector, in fact, is negative. So the number of people who are involved in the unorganized sector are declining, over a period of time. This, of course, is slightly dated data, stops with 2017, but I think the trend, in fact, is getting attenuated. So the capacity manufacturing sector itself is about 11% of the jobs are in the manufacturing sector overall. And out of that, about 70% are in the unorganized sector. And so very few jobs are in the organized sector. So what is the policy talking about? They're talking about a manufacturing sector, a formal sector, which employs very few people. And where are most of the labor at present? Most of the labor is in the service sector. And the service sector, in fact, is growing. Of course, the formal sector can be in manufacturing and also in non-manufacturing. But at the same time, the formal sector jobs, in fact, have very little opportunity because of the automation, and recently because the artificial intelligence and others have come in. And so the opportunities of expanding employment in the organized sector is, in fact, is not much. Whatever the government has done is most welcome. And I think the problems have already been looked into. But then the point which I want to make is that the technology also has made a difference to the unorganized sector. So what is happening today in India the type of jobs that are being created are created on the digital platforms. For example, you have the service aggregators. For example, Zomato. You say Big Basket, Amazon, and then you have Urban Company. These are all service aggregators. So a large number of people with a low skills are in fact going into these jobs. But then the surveys do not give us any information about how many people are employed and how are they being treated and things like that. But of course, ILO, in fact, has done a lot of survey into this. So we have to look into the possibilities of the service aggregators creating jobs, whether they're able to create sufficient amount of jobs and what are the problems there are something which we'll have to look into. So since we're talking about the skills, right now, all the service aggregators are employing people like low-skilled jobs. So the low-skilled people are in fact being absorbed as delivery men, and most of them, about 80% of them, happen to be young people below the age of 35, 40. So these are the jobs which are available in the urban areas to the some of the youth who are entering into the labor force without much skill. And we've also seen that because a large number of jobs have been lost to automation and also other type of technological developments, what has happened is the people with middle-level skills, in fact, have come down to the sort of a low-skilled jobs. For example, a large number of software workers, in fact, have become Uber drivers because, it's still worthwhile. And so there's a sort of instead of jobs getting upgraded, and the demand for the jobs, in fact, has come down in the skilled section and particularly in the middle section. And then what is happening is it is only the low-skilled jobs and no-skilled jobs, in fact, which one have to choose. And so there's a lot of crowding at the lower level, and then there's no capacity at the higher level as far as the skill gradation is concerned. And this is something which, we have to look into. And again,
SWARNA ma'am, can I ask you requesting you to wrap up in next 2-3 minutes, if possible?
Well, have I exceeded my time limit? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're not exceeded, but you're close to it. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I just want to know if I've exceeded my time limit. Okay. And so now, as far as the construction is concerned, the low-skilled jobs and no-skilled jobs are there only in the construction and the agricultural sector. And in both the sectors, what has happened is the absorption capacity has come down. Even in the construction sector, which is supposed to have a higher elasticity earlier, even there the elasticity has come down. And the number of people who can be absorbed in these sectors is also very low. And so the point which I want to make is that the need is there only for the informal sector jobs and no-skill jobs and the low-skill jobs to increase, to really absorb and reduce what is called the jobless growth scenario. So as far as the budget is concerned, whatever policies that have been there, they're most welcome. And but at the same time, very little labor absorption will take place in the long run because the manufacturing sector and the formal sector itself is very small. And there itself, because of there's no guarantee that all these schemes will in fact increase the employment in a substantial manner. I think that point has already been made by other speakers. And of course, as far as the women are concerned, it is most welcome to have creches and hostels. But that again is doubtful whether it will increase the number of women that are being employed, because India seems to be the only country where the women's work participation is very low. And particularly if we don't count the own account workers and the helpers in the area as sort of a part of the labor force as such, because then we have to say that the unpaid labor is much more as far as the women are concerned, and the paid labor force is very small. Then, of course, there are also other issues about the digitalization and then aggregator services and the type of problems that are faced by them. In fact, are very important in future. Because all these service aggregators will use the algorithm to decide as to how to treat these workers. And so these companies are interested in giving high salaries and high incentives at the beginning, but once they establish and get a higher share of the market, then they reduce the incentives, and that is the reason why these people in fact will lose out. And there are too many people want jobs, and then very few people get jobs. And so what is happening now is these are all contract workers, and we're only adding to the gig economy rather than adding to the a proper secure economy. So under these circumstances, it's important to look at the policies and not really addressing the problems of the low-skilled workers and how the technology, the digitalization has been impacting the labor market as such. I think more studies are needed in the area of looking at digitalization and the impact of the changes in technology, particularly on the low-skilled and no-skilled workers. I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for flagging the issue of gig economy and the aggregators. It's interesting to know that the gig workers are called as partners and not workers. So the question is, if they are partners, do they share the profit? So that's an important
sorry,
question.
Can I?
No. Yeah. I mean, Zomato has introduced it, and
they're
there
not
is a policy
partners.
of, yeah,
by no means they're partners.
Yes. What I'm saying is, it's a word play, and it's very easy.
They're all referred to as platform workers because of work on the digital platform.
Yes. So so with that, we have actually exceeded the time. We had time up to 1 o'clock, but it has been an enthralling session. And do we have Professor Ghuman here? I believe he was not going to be available. If not, we can probably have questions, or in case the panelists would like to get more from each other, some explanation from each other. I think session.
I think one of the key things which we've slightly kept on the side is the budget per se.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, extremely useful information about the economy and the trends have come about. But, I mean, I was more looking forward for how the budget interfaces with these rather than the trends of the economy and the society, etc.
Indeed. I mean, the Niti Aayog itself has come up with a report on gig economy, which has its own areas of wonderful dreams. But as you said, we have to ground ourselves into the budget and what difference it's going to make, and not overall trends, of course, set the tune of the budget, but we are here to discuss the budget. Any questions?
If not, ma'am, we can go for a final round to each panelist, maybe in reverse order.
Yeah. So we can probably go for rounding up observations. Can we begin with Professor Acharya?
Yeah.
Just a minute, just 1 minute now for each person.
Actually, if you ask me in 1 minute, the solution to India's problems lie in skilling people under the public sector and do not hand over the education and health sector to the private shops who do not teach but basically charge high fees and get backdoor entries and create doctors and engineers and technicians and pharmacists who don't know very much. So public investment as earlier said by Kothari Commission or any other commission from WHO for health, etc., they have to be strictly adhered to. Period. 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Chachra? Mr. Sandeep Chachra, are you here? Professor Ashok?
Just one comment that we must look the problem of unemployment in a holistic manner, and we must also look the economic policy in a entirely different manner. Piecemeal solution will not address the mega problem which we are facing, demographic transition, huge population is stuck in rural and agriculture sector, and that needs to be a whole sort of different policy perspective to address this problem.
Thank you so much. I just had one curiosity about this cooperative national cooperation mission or act and so on. So, there are people who feel that going from public to private in between would be the response of the society. Don't treat society as a patient which will either be injected by the public sector or be left to the private sector, but let the society emerge through the spirit of cooperation. I wonder how our panelists look at this particular possibility, the middle way of making cooperative movement effective. With
If you
that,
ask me, I think I would
yeah.
like to mention this.
Go ahead. Yes.
See, there are peoples and peoples, and there are capitalists and capitalists, and there are governments and governments. So to talk about a uniform, one-size-fits-all policy of cooperation is not going to work.
No.
It worked in Gujarat. We had a beautiful revolution for milk. Did it work for other commodities is the question. So I think we need to have a common ground in each area to be successful in that. In fact, there are lots. In fact, if you saw in the budget itself, there were very good points. But which were the points taken up? Too much money is given to Gujarat, to Bihar, too much money is given to Andhra. Nobody is wanting to have a national agenda. Let's work on this. So when we are talking about this cooperative effort between different partners, we must have a common point on which the partners can come. And if it is a smaller point, then we need to agree on those particular smaller points and the groups, how they come together. Like, for instance, take Japan. They have, or now Thailand, once one village, one product. So the whole, you know about it, of course. Now, why can't we have it in our country? We've been talking about it for 50 years now. Because in India, the villages are split, as Ambedkar ji had said. What is a village but a group of den, a den of sins? He said it because the Chamar will not work with the Bhangi, Bhangi will not work with the Brahman, Brahman will not work with the Panya. That's the configuration which we have. So we need to work with these. So when we talk about, let's say, cooperation, we have to see how the cooperation is going to work out in great detail and then come up with a cooperation.
Yeah, that's a very valid point, and I think I will connect with you on this after this seminar at some other point. Professor Rathore, your final comments?
My one-liner would be, we should build this strong industry academia connect. Everybody is just talking about, but it is the right time to build that, to develop highly qualified in the terms of quality skilled resources for the country.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think Mr. Sandeep Chachra is here. One final comment, sir. Unmute yourself, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. And my one final comment and a path ahead, apart from right to work, is the question of wealth taxes. So taxing the super rich. We just saw a huge passive consumption, huge conspicuous consumption, and all of us watching as passive consumers of what food is being eaten and what clothes are being worn and what watches are being distributed. And there was no social unrest. which is another issue that I think we need to debate. Are we accepting this fait accompli of inequality you began with? So the question therefore needs to be of, as a society I'm speaking, and the question therefore needs to be that we have to find those revenues. Yes, the middle classes have been asking for tax relief. Middle classes are not are segmented. So there's a section of middle classes which merges with the upper class. And I think that's where the focus of redistribution needs to lie. So taxation measures, measures which enable accumulation of wealth for redistribution. I think that's how I look at it. A lot of those issues need to be targeted and directed to creating popular employment on the ground. And the way to do it is through building solidarity economies, not just the MGNREGA kind of path, but the way to do it is also to bind the hands of the state to
Right. Yeah.
all right to work. So that's how I look at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And SWARNA ma'am.
My take is that we have to concentrate on unorganized sector, and how to create more jobs in the unorganized sector is more important for job creation, and concentrating only on the organized sector is not going to take us very far. And so the future efforts should be in the area of creating jobs in the informal sector, because most of the employment right now seem to be coming from the informal sector. And also we do not have a population with skills, and the levels of education are also not good. And considering that, in the near future, to create employment, I think we have to see how to utilize the youth who have entered into the labor force now, rather than having a long-term aspects of skilling, and only when the demand comes, the skills will be utilized.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I must thank Professor Arjun Kumar for this opportunity to engage with such scholarship. And I have learned so much interacting with all of you, Professor Satya Acharya, Sandeep Chachra ji, Rathore ji, SWARNA ma'am, and of course Ashok Pankaj ji. We are at a situation where the Air India, when it announced 2,200 jobs, there were 25,000 applications, and Air India had a problem dealing with that level of crowd. So that is the situation, and I don't know how the jobs will. I mean, it is a challenge in front of us, and sometimes it feels like a good essay written by somebody who is dreaming very well, but translating them on the ground is a real hard task, and it requires people who think like all of you, and it requires people in the policy implementation with complete dedication and understanding, and a spirit of cooperation and consensus building. Thank you very much, Professor Arjun Kumar and your team and all the esteemed panelists for this.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. We can quickly have a vote of thanks, Ritika. Please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As we come to the end of today's discussion, I, Ritika Pandey, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on the behalf of IMPRI, Center for Work and Welfare. I would like to thank all of you for attending today's deliberation, a panel discussion on employment, livelihoods, and Union Budget 2024-25. As a part of IMPRI 5th annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget 2024-25, we are grateful to our chair for this session, Professor Suchita Krishnaprasad ji, our esteemed panelist, Mr. Sandeep Chachra ji, Professor R.S. Ghuman ji, Professor Randhir Singh Rathore ji, Professor SWARNA SADASIVAM VEPA ji, Professor Sathi Acharya ji, Professor Ashok Pankaj ji, for taking part in the discussion and enlightening us. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We are grateful if you are watching us later on our YouTube channel or listening to us on various podcasts or reading our publication. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI web policy and web policy learning. Wishing you a good day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you.